Christmas season is the time of the year where families gather together to celebrate the Yuletide season, savoring that time off well-earned during the year, and enjoying the company of loved ones. This magnitude of gathering creates the Christmas holiday rush, where thousands of people flock transportation terminals, malls, and local shopping places in a last-minute attempt to get home and bring holiday presents for their family. One evening of December 1987, a passenger ferry, on its peaceful going-home trip to Manila, collided with an oil tanker, killing a few thousand people and leaving a mark not only in Philippine history but to the whole world as one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters. MV Doña Paz, a 2,324 gross ton passenger ferry with listed capacity of 1,568 passengers and a crew of 66 men, is one of many shipping vessels owned by Sulpicio Lines, now known as Philippines Pan-Asia Carrier Corporation. Originally known as the Himei Urimaru, it was built in 1963 by the Japanese company Onomichi Dockyard and operated by RKK Line in Hiroshima. This maiden vessel was powered by a single Niigata engine, harnessing 5,500 horsepower and capable of 18 knots top speed, first launched on April 25 that year and had a listed capacity of 608 passengers. In October 1975, it was sold to Sulpicio Lines and was renamed to MV Don Sulpicio, as homage to its owner Don Sulpicio Go. MV Don Sulpicio was refitted to cater more passengers, and the records officially listed it as 1,424. A year later, the sister ship of Himei Urimaru, Otohime Maru, would also be acquired from the same company. Otohime Maru had the same 5,500 horsepower Niigata engine, but was capable of 19.5 knots top speed. She would then be renamed to Doña Ana, and the twin ferries would be known as the Big Two, offering cheap fares among the competition-heavy Manila to Cebu route. At that time, their biggest competitor on the Manila-Cebu route was the reputable William Lines. On June 5, 1979, MV Don Sulpicio was gutted with fire on its voyage from Manila to Cebu. All 1,164 passengers and crews aboard were rescued, but MV Don Sulpicio was docked and declared a total wreckage. Thorough investigation traced the culprit back to a cigarette butt carelessly thrown into the cargo hold some 7 hours after departure from Manila port. With the wreckage dragged into the open waters of Batangas port, Sulpicio Lines decided to salvage what was left of it, and MV Don Sulpicio would be refitted again and given a new name, MV Doña Paz. She was the second vessel to carry that name in the Sulpicio Lines fleet, with the first one being an XFS, or freight and supply ship. Its primary route would also be changed, now traveling from Manila to Tacloban, and vice versa, twice a week with a stopover at Catbalogan, Samar. On the other side of the disaster was the Empty Vector, a 629 gross ton oil tanker, previously known as Oil Nick II, and carrying a crew of 13 men. It was built in 1980 in Manila by Navotas Industrial Corporation and operated by Vector Shipping Incorporated, owned by a certain Francisco Soriano. This 170 feet long tanker was designed to transport petroleum products such as kerosene, diesel, and gasoline. December 20, 1987, Sunday, 6 o'clock a.m. MV Doña Paz can be seen silently docked from the port, waiting till 6:30 a.m. to start its 375-mile journey from Tacloban to Manila. It was the usual busy and cold December morning, and the port was buzzing with life from thousands of people staring back and forth. It was just a few days away from Christmas. Not to mention, it was the weekend before the celebration, so the holiday rush was in full swing. It was no surprise that the dock would be filled with hundreds of thousands of people wanting to go back to their respective offshore relatives. To others, they were young adults basking on the hope to find their golden opportunity in Manila, mostly seeking jobs as maids. That morning, MV Doña Paz was once again tasked to carry its routine 1,500 passenger voyage back to Manila, a task the ship has been doing for the past 8 years of its service. Earlier, people would flock to the ship just as proper behavior was expected. Families and friends were cheering as they strutted and boarded the ship. However, as the departure time was nearing, so began the haste of people trying to get aboard the ship. It was believed that the crew were already aware that the maximum limit had already been reached, but given the pleas of people wanting to get onto the ride, they let the people board, bypassing safety protocols and letting them be at least for this ride. People commonly as chance passengers were able to acquire extra tickets when they had already boarded the ship, thanks to the scalpers who sell the tickets at a lower price to passengers who are cramming to buy one. The money would then go on directly to the pockets of the crew. This small practice wasn't anything new, and it would prove to be one of the factors that would ultimately lead to the demise of the ship. Aludia Baksal, 18 and one of the few who boarded from Eastern Samar's stopover, recalled the morning as she had boarded the ship with her father Salvador Baksal. She decided to forego her school Christmas party to travel with her father and spend the holidays with him in Manila. Upon boarding, she immediately noticed the volume of passengers on the ship. It was noticeably occupied and people were fitted into every inch of the open space of the vessel, leaving little space to walk around or find comfort to sleep in. Apart from the crowd, present also are the tons of cartons and baggage from the passengers itself. 4 people shared one makeshift cot and hundreds sat on the floor of the 3-deck ship. Later in the voyage, her father Salvador left her to tend to their belongings and went to the ship's kitchen to gather food. Her father was met with a stampede of people in the kitchen, each demanding a portion of food for their families. Lutgardo Nieto, 26 and a Philippine constabulary corporal, recalled something was off while boarding the ship. He, alongside 1,000 more military and police personnel, boarded the ship for their routine vacation return to Manila to spend time with their families for the holidays. Corporal Nieto also said he went back to Manila to follow up the papers for his promotion so his payout could be upgraded. They were still in their military uniforms and carrying their rifles along. Before they boarded, he noticed that the vessel was slightly tilted to one side. It dawned on him that the vessel might be overloaded. He thought to himself that this was expected since it's the holiday season, and they went on as usual, settling in with the rest of his comrades as soon as they found themselves a resting place amongst several hundreds already boarded in the ship. December 20, 10:30 p.m., about 16 hours into the voyage and 200 miles of sea waters traveled. By now, the ship is situated about 40 kilometers off the coast of Dumali Point in Pinamalayan, Oriental Mindoro, and has been traversing a steady rate of 14 knots. MV Doña Paz is currently steering the somewhat edgy and shark-infested waters of Tablas Strait, a 545-meter deep strait that separates the islands of Mindoro from Tablas and Romblon. The vessel was more than halfway on their journey already, and they were expected to hit the port of Manila by 4 o'clock a.m. the next morning. And with the last offshore contact made earlier at 10 o'clock p.m., the crew settled in their quarters. Families all across the crowded vessel snuggled in their respective areas, covering themselves in cots to keep them and their loved ones warm. Several kilometers away, MT Vector was steering the same waters, carrying 8,800 barrels of petroleum products, owned by the ship's charterer Caltex Philippines, now known as Chevron. At that point of the journey, it was steady cruising at a top speed of 8 kilometers per hour. The small tanker left Limay, Bataan on December 19 at around 8 p.m., expecting to hit the port of Masbate the following morning. Sleeping on the port side corridors were Salvador and his daughter Aludia Baksal, alongside several line of passengers already sleeping. Salvador felt an urge to pee, and due to the lack of bathroom near him, he decided to relieve himself on the ship's front bow. It was at this moment he noticed an empty vector from the horizon on the left side, its bright lights piercing his sleepy eyes. For a while, he was in awe, thinking it was just a small fishing vessel. A few more minutes, and it dawned to him that it was a large vessel, and that it would crash into their ship. Bracing himself for the impending danger, he immediately rushed back to Aludia, who was still some distance from him. Then, a few minutes later, a large clanking metal sound was heard. Survivor accounts told stories of hearing what sounded like a rolling thunder, caused by the steel rubbing and piercing into the frame of the ship. Almost everyone on board rolled in their sleep as the empty vector collided with MV Doña Paz. At the time of the impact, nobody knew what was going on, as everyone was either already asleep or right about to do so. No collision alarms or warning signals were ever heard. Everyone was caught off guard wondering what just happened. Empty vector had just rammed near the port bow side, or the left portion of the ship near the front, leaving the engine room of MV Doña Paz wrecked open. The hull breach tripped the main switch and instantly caused blackout, plunging the ship into pitch-black darkness amidst the clear and dark open waters. Lutgardo Nieto was on the ship's upper deck when he heard this loud thundering sound. In an interview, he said, "It sounded like steel going clank, clank. There was a blackout. All the lights went out." Seconds after the collision and the ship blackout, the ship's front bow was getting engulfed in fire. It was at this moment that the terrified passengers knew what was happening, as the collision created an enormous flame, illuminating the dark surroundings, and was quickly spreading. Everyone started panicking and scrambling around, carrying their luggages and looking out for their loved ones, meleeing everyone who were on their way to find an escape route to safety. Some passengers decided to run into the lower deck of the ship, believing it was a safe area from the fire. The children were crying, adults scrambled everywhere left and right, while some collected their baggage in hopes of salvaging whatever can be saved. Within a minute, the engine room of MV Doña Paz exploded. Soon after, the front bow of the empty vector had exploded as well. The explosion from the oil tanker discharged the cargo barrels in the air and into the sea, looking like Molotovs thrown out in the open, carrying with them tons of oil and spreading it to the waters of Tabla Strait. It did not take long for these fiery oil barrels to spread oil and flames to the immediate vicinity of the ships, creating a sea of fire right in front of the panic-stricken passengers of MV Doña Paz. To some already on the railings, the first thing that came to their mind was to jump into the waters and try to stay afloat for rescue, not knowing that the oil had already leaked. Their survival instinct tells them that the ship would sink in no time, and the only safe place is the waters below. Everyone was unaware that they collided with an oil tanker. They just knew the fire was caused by the collision and its impact on the engine. Nobody knew jumping out in the waters would pull themselves into another form of danger, getting drenched in a heavy mixture of oil and water, with the ravaging sea of flames ready to catch up to them any time. But as panic and fear had already set in, hundreds and hundreds of passengers had already jumped into the waters from the railings. A couple of survivor accounts told the gruesome events that transpired. Each had their own story why they were there on the ship, but everyone was in the same paranoia staring at their own mortality that night. Salvador Bacsal, 44, and an experienced fisherman, immediately thought of jumping into the waters with her daughter Aludia. They were lucky enough to get reunited in the waters, despite the numerous had already jumped. He said, "Everything happened so fast. I didn't even hear a lot of crying. I think no more than 150 of us were able to jump to the water because the flames swept over the ship so quickly. Most people were asleep. After a while, it was so quiet." He also added that the ship shuddered to a stop as soon as smoke started seeping into the sleeping area. In an interview, Aludia described the scene as an inferno, a fire in the middle of the sea. Paquito Osabel, 42, recounted the event, saying the flames rapidly engulfed the ship like a wildfire, and that the sea around it was surrounded by a blazing ring of heat and flame. He was talking to his sister and 3 nieces when he heard a loud explosion. He said, "I went to the window to see what happened, and I saw the sea in flames. I shouted to my family that there was a fire, but the fire spread so rapidly that there were flames everywhere. People were screaming and jumping overboard. The smoke was terrible. We couldn't see each other. All I could see were the flames. I just jumped into the sea." Almario Balanay, 44, later described in an interview that the sea of fire may have reached about a kilometer wide. The three of them, alongside Moir Sapura, 37, and Generoso Batola, 29, boarded from Borongan, Eastern Samar, survived by outswimming the flames below as well. They found themselves afloat in the middle of Tablas Strait as they watched the two ships burn and sink away from a distance. Zosimo de la Rama, 21, boarded the vessel with his sister-in-law Sally Alipio, recalled the moments during the hysteria where he got stepped on several times by passengers panicking. Despite getting staggered in the melee, he willed himself through the railings and decided to jump into the waters when he saw the fire. He said, "The whole place was burning. I heard cries for help, and I kept saying, 'God, God, why is this happening?' And then I imagined Satan laughing at all of us." After jumping, he found a floating log through which he swam into and clung himself, endlessly praying and hoping for any means of rescue. Eugenio Orot, 27, claimed he was one of the first few to immediately jump following the commotion. He surfaced hundreds of feet away from the burning ships and looked for his wife and two children, but to no avail. He was left in the middle of the sea floating for hours. Severino Carrion, 25, and a bus conductor from Catbalogan, claimed that the Doña Paz was so jammed with passengers that he was forced to sleep on deck while three other members of his family managed to find a space 3 floors below. He said, "I heard a very loud explosion. It woke me up and I saw the fire." Carrion was taking his relative to spend Christmas in Manila with a brother of his. He said that the oil tanker had plowed directly into the midsection of the Doña Paz before exploding, releasing the highly flammable petrol cargo over both vessels. Then I jumped into the water and swam for some hours, praying that the ship would save me. Samuel Carillo, 26, said that he was on his way to the ship's canteen to grab a meal when he felt a sudden violent jerk, followed thereafter by a loud explosion. He said, "I went up on the deck and there were flames everywhere. I jumped overboard." Alejandro Estuita, 21, of Pasay, Western Samar, was on deck C, still awake in his cots. He was trying to muster his sleep when he heard people suddenly shouting as thick black smoke engulfed the entire ship, which became raging fire in a matter of seconds. He said, "I only felt a bumping sensation before that. But I am quite sure that it was MV Doña Paz that bumped the other ship, because if it was the tanker that hit us, it could have been louder, but no oil spills in just a few seconds." He also mentioned that as soon as the commotion and fire started, he joined the others who jumped into the burning waters and swam away. He also pinpointed that MT Vector was the one who first exploded, while MV Doña Paz was the one who was burning away slowly until it exploded and sank in the depths of the sea. MV Doña Paz sank within 2 hours of the collision, while MT Vector sank within 4 hours. Despite the horrendous circumstances, luck may have smiled upon the passengers who willed themselves to survival. An inter-island ship called MS Don Claudio, once known as the Japanese ship Okonoshima Maru, was cruising several miles away. They were on their standard Negros to Manila route that night when skipper Captain Melesio Barranco saw glowing balls of fire in the horizon from an estimated distance of about 8 miles, which were discharged oil barrels when MT Vector's bow exploded. In an interview, he said, "We saw big flames as high as a 10-story building and lots of black smoke, just like a building on fire. However, with a top speed of 18 knots, it took them some time to get there, and when they did, they never had a visual of the two ships that collided, and instead found people, several dead, and some screaming for help, alongside hundreds floating around." He also added in an interview that, "We also guessed that there was a tanker involved because the water smelled of oil." It was estimated that the people who survived were floating in the middle of the sea for more than an hour when the ship arrived. Initially, the MS Don Claudio threw in a rope for people to climb on. However, some of the survivors claimed they were already too weak at that point to climb the rope. In an act of urgency, officers of the MS Don Claudio began throwing their nets at the sea for the people to climb on. A total of 26 passengers were rescued from the waters, 24 of which were passengers of MV Doña Paz, and 2 were crew from MT Vector. After 3 hours of scanning the area for survivors, they finally ceased their efforts and continued their route while tending to the injured and needing medical assistance aboard their ship. Captain Barranco also mentioned there were 4 other commercial vessels scouting the waters when they left the area, but still unable to find any survivors other than what MS Don Claudio had rescued. They arrived at the Manila North Harbor in the early morning hours of December 21, with several ambulances waiting in line that were called by the ship a few hours earlier. When they offboarded the ship, survivors who had severe burns were brought to Metropolitan Hospital, some others to San Juan de Dios Hospital, and some to Jose Reyes Memorial Medical Center individually. Those who were capable and did not need any medical assistance walked off and arranged transportation on their own, while some were met at the port by their relatives. Those who did not need medical attention but didn't have anywhere to go were left to fend for themselves at the meantime, waiting for the Department of Social Welfare and Development representatives to fetch them and provide temporary shelter to live in. The incident increasingly drew authorities and public notice early that morning. The lead government agency for handling maritime emergencies, Philippine Rescue Coordinating Council, were informed of the incident a full 8 hours after the time of the collision. At the time of the coordination, the handed down information was determined as secondhand and lacked concreteness for the agency to resemble any form of response. Only later in the afternoon that day, another full 8 hours after first being reported, was the information deemed complete and accurate. This was the only time the PRCC acted and mobilized a search and rescue operation, deploying the units of the Philippine Coast Guard, Philippine Air Force, and U.S. Air Force into the Visayan waters. On arrival, the troops did not find any notable traces of the ship, except for floating debris and several dead human bodies floating, and no survivors within a few kilometers of the reported site. With that in hand, the rescue group focused on retrieving redeemable human bodies for identification and proper burial. Within the next few days, bodies that were both bloated and charred have started getting washed offshore in Mindoro and, according to some reports, off the shores of Batangas. Local fishermen who helped with the retrieval operations came home with several corpses of the people they found in the waters. The Coast Guard has enlisted the help of these local fishermen and other water vessels to assist in retrieving the bodies that have been floating around the sea. After days of search and rescue operation, it was estimated they were able to retrieve around a combined 500 bodies, most of which were burned, bloated, and in a decaying state that they were highly unidentifiable. There were also unconfirmed reports about a 4-year-old survivor found floating on a log off the coast of Mindoro, said to have been rescued by fishermen. The boy was not officially listed, but that could have been the 27th survivor had it been confirmed. By December 29, it officially listed the retrieved body count at 108, citing errors in the previously released count of 292 last Christmas Day and 133 the day after due to multiple reporting of bodies. As for the rest of the bodies brought by the fishermen, it became a problem for the local village. They have no choice but to carefully find a disposal place, otherwise, the foul smell will cause harm to everyone's health. Boat by boat, bodies came in batches, forcing some of the locals to dig holes in the sand to bury the bodies despite being unable to identify the victims. Some sprayed them with sanitizers and created makeshift structures to minimize the smell, while some of the bodies scattered by the Coast Guard were wrapped in cloth and transported to the nearest local morgue. Antonio Babijes, chief of the Rescue Coordination Center, said some of the victims may have been eaten by sharks or swept out to sea by strong currents. Days grew by and the local fishers scene encountered another gruesome problem. Fishermen reported hauling their fishing nets with traces of human flesh, either caught up in the drag or finding them inside the body of the fish. This became a huge concern, most notably when there have been reports of diarrhea outbreak and respiratory illnesses in the community. The paranoia was highly fortified and publicized when, in a newspaper article by Manila Standard dated December 30, 1987, Social Services Secretary Mita Pardo de Tavera was quoted, "I've been avoiding fish." This was cited due to a recent incident involving a fisherman catching a fish with a human finger inside its belly. "Except for bangus, which can be grown on ponds, I wouldn't want to eat any other fish, not in a long time," she added. Meanwhile, outside the confines of Sulpicio Line's office in Manila, thousands of people scrambled around looking for answers. They stormed the office demanding the list of passengers so they could confirm if their loved ones were one of those that got caught up in the tragedy. Hundreds of raging men and women cried, stood for hours, waiting for the officials of the Sulpicio Lines to disseminate factual information on what happened. Sulpicio Lines released an official announcement a few days later, saying that the number of passengers aboard the MV Doña Paz was not crowded. This included the official list of the passengers, as well as an announcement that the ship was insured for 25 million pesos, and it was willing to indemnify each survivor in the official list to amount to 20,000 pesos. This drew an ire of violent responses and enraged the people who deemed the shipping lines were hiding something, as well as demanding that Sulpicio Lines also indemnify the families of the passengers that were not listed. Arthur Lim, counsel for Sulpicio Lines, stated that, as the Coast Guard's release clearance for the ship, the manifesto has its records listed at 1,493 passengers and 59 crew members, an attempt to solidify their stance on the grounds that the ship has and never was at any point during the trip overcrowded. A few days later, they released a revised statement showing a manifest of 1,583 passengers and 58 crew members. They also started pointing the blame towards the MT Vector, citing their grossly undermanned and unseaworthy vessel carrying dangerous cargo. Vector Shipping Incorporated, owner of the MT Vector tanker, immediately took notice of the finger-pointing actions done by Sulpicio Lines. As response to this, they released a statement regarding the incident through their legal counsel, Attorney Jose Sison. In their response, they stated that the overcrowding of MV Doña Paz was the main culprit. The overcrowding impaired the maneuverability of the ferry, and therefore severing any chances for avoidance of the collision. They cited that MT Vector was performing its standard collision avoidance procedures, but did not receive any response from the MV Doña Paz, and thus was not able to act on time. They also cited conflict of interest with the Coast Guard investigation, claiming it will never end up as Sulpicio Lines' fault, as this will fall back to their hands, knowing they were the ones that provided MV Doña Paz clearance to travel. Attorney Pablito Rojas, representative for the dozens of the victims' families, backed this claim, saying, "The investigation is being conducted by the Philippine Coast Guard, and it was an official of the Philippine Coast Guard that cleared this voyage. I have serious misgivings about the progress and the fairness of this investigation." Then President Corazon Aquino called the accident a national tragedy of harrowing proportions, ordering all respective agencies a full investigation, and declared strict sanctions must be imposed on all parties at fault. She added, "Our sadness is all the more painful because the tragedy struck with the approach of Christmas." An investigation by the Board of Marine Inquiry spearheaded by Chairman Captain Dario Fajardo followed, issuing a subpoena to MT Vector survivors, Second Mate Reynaldo Tarife, 41, and Quartermaster Franklin Bornillo, 26, in hopes of shedding detailed insights on what had transpired. Due to the magnitude of this tragedy, several government departments conducted separate hearings and inquiries to determine the cause and culminate a resolution for all the families left behind. Apart from BMI, separate hearings and investigations were conducted by the Senate Committee on National Defense, Philippine Coast Guard, and the Senate Congress, special taking in survivor statements as critical investigation points for what has transpired. In March 1988, the Board of Marine Inquiry handed down the fault on Francisco Soriano and Vector Shipping Corporation, citing its vessel as unworthy. The grounds for being sea unworthy was because it was carrying dangerous cargo, referring to the highly flammable oil barrels, while having no necessary license or permits to operate and with a crew that had no qualified license to board the tanker. The MT Vector's master, Captain Celso Abella, did not have a chief mate license and was only qualified as a second mate, while the chief engineer had no license at all. It also revealed that the oil tanker did not have a qualified lookout on the bridge. With all these findings, they have absolved Sulpicio Lines of any liabilities with this decision. Meanwhile, the Senate inquiry blamed both owners of the ship, as well as pointing out the lack of support by the Philippine government to the shipping industry. As investigation and hearings from multiple government bodies progressed, there were multiple critical findings that surfaced, all pointing out how none would have almost survived the tragic night. First is the conflict on the official passenger count. The official passenger manifest indicated 1,583 people, plus a crew count of 58, with 675 people boarded the ship, from the initial port at Tacloban, while 908 boarded on it at Catbalogan. At the time, the declared capacity of the ship was 1,518 passengers and 60 crew members, which in itself indicated that there was an overloading already. This did not tie up with survivor accounts, which have been consistent in statements that the ship has been visibly crowded. On December 28, 1987, Representative Raul Daza of Northern Samar claimed at least 2,000 passengers were not on the manifest. This was a claim based on the names compiled from radio and television stations in Tacloban, which was reported by the loved ones of those who believed their kin had boarded the ill-fated vessel. This claimed missing passenger list was published in the Philippine Daily Inquirer for 3 straight days after it was publicly announced. By February 1988, the National Bureau of Investigation reported that there were at least 3,099 passengers on board. After a decade of court hearings and settlement claims, a presidential task force reported that there were about 4,341 passengers plus 69 crew members, 58 from MV Doña Paz and 11 from MT Vector. All in all, the unofficial death count before the turn of millennium was listed at 4,385. This discrepancy is easily tied up to a number of factors. 1. Children under 4 years of age are not listed in the manifest. Given that this trip is for the holidays, it was safe to assume hundreds of parents brought along their kids, and it was also proven through survivor statements. 2. As indicated earlier, scalpers who sold extra tickets inside the ship added to the conflict. An anonymous Sulpicio Lines official actually told the United Press International that because of the Christmas holiday, spare tickets were purchased illegally aboard the MV Doña Paz at a cheaper rate, and these passengers would then be left off the official manifest. The anonymous official also added that these spare ticket holders and their children were likewise not included. The two combined proved to be the issue when determining the actual count of the passengers, which hindered the authorities on determining how many actually died that night, an outstanding issue that lingers to this day. Second is the alleged intentional delay and changing of schedule by the crew. Marilu Bermejo, 36, and a resident of Catbalogan, claimed that Doña Paz arrived at the port at around 7 a.m. on December 19. It was scheduled to leave by 9 a.m. for Tacloban port, but for some reason, left late at 11 a.m. During the extra 2-hour period, the crew still allowed passengers and cargo to go on board. This was a change of routine since it was already established that initial loading was to be made at Tacloban and conduct a stopover at Catbalogan. Though not highly illegal, it was deemed that the change in routine caused more people and cargo to be loaded to the ship than usual, with accounts claiming there may have been around 1,016 passengers. Further investigation based on the reported coalition of those loved ones left behind totaled at around 2,187 already, drawing conclusions that the ship may have been overloaded even before it arrived at Tacloban. Third are the multiple findings of negligence from crew members of both vessels. Mori Sapura claimed that only him out of their group of 8, who boarded from the stopover in Samar, was manifested before entering the ship. He said he did not understand why and then they were just left to board the ship. Another act of negligence is when it was found out that the MV Doña Paz did not have a radio. It became apparently clear that there were no means of immediate communication with any outside ship in case it was needed. Survivor accounts also told during the investigation that the life vest lockers were locked, which could have saved a few more, if not hundreds, had it been accessible during the emergency. They also mentioned that during the mass hysteria, none of the crew enforced any sort of emergency evacuation procedures to the passengers and just left everyone to fend for their own. And one could argue to be the worst negligence finding of all. It was found during the Philippine Coast Guard investigation that only one apprentice crew member of MV Doña Paz was left in control of the ship at the time of the incident. Corporal Lutgardo Nieto manifested this idea from the statement of a fellow officer he met while walking around about an hour before the collision. On top of that, there were loud noises coming from what the fellow officer found out to be the crew members of the ship. I heard music and laughter. They were having fun. Do you know that the captain was there at the party? The captain of the ship was at the party, the fellow officer told him. While not totally conclusive, it was deemed that whoever was at the wheel that time was not eligible enough to be in control. The Coast Guard investigation revealed that the chief and third mate were drinking beer, while the ferry's captain, Captain Eusebio Nazareno, was watching a Betamax tape in his cabin. The Coast Guard investigation, however, did not disclose the names of the mentioned crew members, nor reveal their location on the ship at the time of the incident. The official investigation also indicated, our initial finding does not seem to indicate a great number of people boarded the ship, in excess of the manifested passengers. But we do have a report that when the Coast Guard had cleared the vessel and had left the ship, many people jumped on board. The government mandated Sulpicio Lines to compensate the families of the victims, with each family eligible for an indemnification amount of 30,000 pesos. A processing center was set up in Manila, hosted by officials of Sulpicio Lines, to cater individuals with claims on the indemnity. They did remain strong in their statement with their official 1,583 passenger list manifesto, but had also announced that they are willing to indemnify the families of the passengers who were not on the official list, provided they can gather supporting documents that their kin boarded the vessel on that trip. Sulpicio Lines, however, required all claimants to file a waiver that upon receiving the 30,000 peso payment, they will absolve the shipping company of any legal liabilities. Claims totaled around 3,000, but Sulpicio Lines later found that there were fraudulent claims, citing some people used the incident to exploit money from the company. Some families did not pursue the claim because of the waiver, and later on decided to file individual legal cases to both Sulpicio Lines and Caltex Philippines. Over the years, multiple lawsuits and legal actions had undergone between the shipping companies and survivors and families of the victims. In January 1988, attorney Pablito Rojas, who also lost a brother, a sister-in-law, and a nephew in the disaster, requested permission from the Supreme Court to file a suit on behalf of its pauper litigants. This was after the court ruled a $300,000 filing fee after attempting to file a $60 million class action suit on both Sulpicio Lines and Vector Shipping Corporation. He said, "It is immediately evident that none of the plaintiffs, even with their combined resources, can afford to shoulder." No further action was done after the request. In December 1988, the class suit against Caltex and affiliate companies in Texas and in Louisiana was officially filed in the U.S., claiming negligence on the part of the accused for harboring an unseaworthy vessel to transport their cargo. The Texas class suit was dismissed after a few years, but the Louisiana case in the Civil District Court for Orleans Parish remained outstanding. Steamship Mutual, who provides passenger liability insurance for both Sulpicio Lines and Vector Shipping Incorporated, was also included in the class suit. In 2001, the Texas lawsuit was reinstated on the Regional Trial Court of Tacloban, which then dismissed the suit on grounds of prescription. Additional complainants filed for a motion of intervention in the RTC of Manila, but were dismissed a year later due to lack of merit. The Louisiana lawsuit would remain outstanding until in March 2017, when heirs of the victims received checks equivalent to $4,343 or about 218,887 Philippine peso, based on the exchange rate at the time of awarding. Representatives of Caltex International, Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, Metrobank at Tacloban Astrodome, Samar State University Gymnasium in Catbalogan City, and at Asian Social Institute in Ermita, Manila, were handling the claims on-site, which happened on two batches, March 4 and 5. The third and last batches of checks released took place on March 11 and March 12 on the same allocated site. Attorney Leo Giron, president of Integrated Bar of the Philippines in Leyte, said the final decision was the direct result of an amicable settlement between Caltex International and the heirs represented by their American lawyers in the class action lawsuit. In October 1991, the Macasa family, consisting of Adelfo, Emilia, Timoteo, and Cornelio Jr., filed a complaint of damages arising from a breach of contract of carriage. All four were children of Cornelio and Anacleta Macasa, victims of the tragedy who boarded the vessel with their 8-year-old grandson Richie. The Macasa children prayed for an indemnity amount totaling 1.7 million pesos for projected income, actual and compensatory damages for lost assets and belongings, moral and exemplary damages, and for legal incurred fees. Almost 4 years later, in May 1995, the Regional Trial Court Branch 17 of Davao City awarded a civil indemnity amount of 950,000 pesos to the family. 8 years after the ruling, In September 2003, the Court of Appeals sealed the decision and exonerated Caltex Philippines from liability. On top of that, a total of 250,000 pesos from actual and indemnity damages has been removed from the liability. The Macasa family filed a petition for review to the Supreme Court years later. It was then denied in July 2008, citing lack of merit and raising issues such as the lack of decision finality from the Board of Marine Inquiry and clear absence of credible eyewitnesses. In October 1999, the Supreme Court First Division ordered Sulpicio Lines to pay the family of two victims, 47-year-old public school teacher Sebastian Cañazal and his 11-year-old daughter Corazon. A total of 1.2 million in moral and exemplary damages, including lawyers' fees and projected future earnings, was included in the fine. The court also held Vector Shipping Incorporated and owner Francisco Soriano liable and ordered them to reimburse Sulpicio Lines Incorporated whatever damages, lawyers' fees, and costs the company was ordered to pay to the Cañazals. The court decision also absolved Caltex, as charter of the MV Vector, of any liability for damages under Philippine maritime laws. In September 2006, the Court of Appeals upheld a lower court ruling that ordered Sulpicio Lines to pay 14.9 million pesos to the family of geodetic engineer Maximo Lorenzo Jr., another victim to a tragedy. In a 51-page decision penned by Associate Justice Celia Librea Liagogo, the shipping company is liable to pay the inked amount broken down into the following: 13.8 million pesos as compensatory damages for Maximo's earning capacity, plus 1 million pesos for moral and exemplary damages, as well as 100,000 pesos for attorney's fees, and 50,000 pesos as indemnity payout. This CA ruling was a modification of the decision done by the Quezon City RTC Branch 96 decision, which ordered Sulpicio Lines to pay the aggregated amount of 12.8 million pesos. It was cited guilty of breach of contract of carriage for failing to exercise due diligence on carrying Maximo Lorenzo to his supposed destination, a claim bound to a contract of carriage between the engineer and the shipping company. As for the rest of hundreds of families of other victims, the time, effort, and money needed to sustain a legal proceeding was too much for them to handle. Most of them settled with a 30,000 peso indemnity claim and agreed to the waiver clause. For others who already filed a case, they became frustrated with the slow judicial process and eventually decided to agree to small lump sums payments on off-court settlements. Sulpicio Lines would again be involved in 3 more major maritime incidents in a span of 3 decades, eventually earning the moniker Suspicious Lines. In an attempt to fend off the stained public reputation, the company decided to adopt a new name under Philippines Pan-Asia Carrier Corporation, or PSACC. This was a resolution adopted in December 2009 by a majority vote of the members of Board of Directors and stockholders. The resolution was then approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission on April 20, 2010 under the amended Articles of Incorporation, from which PSACC would be doing business under the name Pan-Asia Carrier. The amended Articles of Incorporation did not disclose any specific reason for the change of corporate name. However, a month before the SEC approval, company VP Harold Go said in an interview that the change of name was the management's way of rebuilding the company image again after all the negative publicity. He said it was to have a fresh start, most especially after another maritime incident that happened just 2 years before. Pan-Asia Carrier would also shift its focus on cargo shipments rather than passenger travels as it embraces the new name. The tragedy of MV Doña Paz, labeled as the worst peacetime maritime disaster in history, revealed a lot of shortcomings to both the shipping companies and the government support for the maritime industry. An outdated disaster response system, lack of ample government acknowledgement and modernization priorities, the rampant malpractice of corruption, and a broken system that allowed the unqualified to have the lives of thousands in their control, to name a few. It is imperative that existing rules and regulations are observed at all times, and if we deem certain rules and regulations need to be changed to cope with the modern times, then we simply should adapt as we always did. Lying upright at the bottom of the sea with a depth of more than 500 meters, both the MV Doña Paz and MV Vector are a sunken, yet living reminder that safety is an utmost human priority.